Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, walking a tightrope between the US and Russia, India is deepening economic ties with Moscow, despite pressure from Washington. So what's behind this rapprochement, and can New Delhi maintain balance between the two rivals? With new investments and business deals, Syria's economy is showing signs of life 1 year on from the fall of Bashar al-Assad. But the scale of destruction is staggering. So who foots the bill to rebuild the country? And the future of streaming and cinema is hanging in the balance. A bidding battle over Warner Brothers has raised concerns about consolidation. So why does this takeover matter to film lovers like you and me? India is hedging between energy security and strategic partnerships. Despite US pressure, it's kept buying cheap Russian oil and has recently strengthened economic ties with Moscow, from trade to weapons and critical minerals. But this is a delicate balancing act for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He wants to cut deals with Moscow while staying friends with Washington, his biggest trading partner. For Russia's President Vladimir Putin, the partnership provides cash to sustain the war in Ukraine. It also shows that his nation still has powerful partners and isn't completely isolated despite Western sanctions. Katia Lopez-Hodayan reports.
Russia and India are strengthening ties. President Vladimir Putin and Prime Minister Narendra Modi have made it clear they are open for business despite pressure from Western governments. Washington has called on India to stop buying Russian oil, accusing New Delhi of funding the war in Ukraine. But Russia says it's ready to keep on selling without interruption.
The final policy statement outlines large-scale plans for future cooperation in politics and security, economics and finance, transport, energy, education and culture.
Ties between Russia and India go back decades. India is the world's top buyer of Russian arms, with purchases of around $60 billion over the last 2 decades. For years, the balance has tilted in Moscow's favor. India's imports from Russia, mostly driven by oil, reached more than $60 billion last year, while Indian exports to Russia, including machinery, pharmaceuticals, and chemicals, added to roughly $5 billion. India is looking for economic stability. Russia for closer friends. Now both leaders are looking to grow bilateral trade to $100 billion by 2030, expanding energy and defense deals.
As per my conversations with President Putin and the potential we see, I don't think we'll have to wait until 2030 to achieve the $100 billion target in bilateral trade. We are moving forward with the determination to achieve this goal ahead of schedule.
India is facing a 50% tariff from the US, a punitive tax for being one of Russia's top oil importers. With one of the world's fastest-growing economies, Modi is feeling the pressure. He's engaging in talks with Washington to lower the tariffs, but in the meantime, he's looking to diversify his economy.
The latest data also shows that we are diversifying. So why not diversify with Russia? If they have the requirement of Indian goods, which earlier was being sold to, say, USA or other countries, why can't we start selling it to them?
Trade deals with Russia could redraw global supply chains across energy, critical minerals, and manufacturing. Together, Moscow and New Delhi could become a new hub for emerging economies, shifting supply chains away from China and away from the West. Putin's 2-day visit to New Delhi marked his first since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Moscow hopes it sends a message that efforts to isolate Russia over its war in Ukraine have failed. Katia Lopez-Hodayan, Al Jazeera for Counting the Cost.
Let's dig into India-Russia ties a little more deeply. We're joined by Sambit Bhattacharya, who's a professor of economics at the University of Sussex. He joins us from Brighton in the UK. Professor, really good to have you with us. Who needs who more right now, economically speaking, India or Russia?
I guess the relationship is mutual. It's dependent on mutual cooperation rather than one being dependent on the other. And as your presenter earlier indicated, that there's plenty of room for cooperation, and the economies are perfectly compatible with each other.
All right, though, President Putin insisting once again that Russia is a reliable supplier of oil to India and was ready to provide uninterrupted fuel supplies. But can India afford to keep buying Russian oil without damaging ties with Washington?
I think in the short run, pressure on India is likely to increase. However, if you look at sort of the President Trump's recent national defense strategy, where the US is pivoting more towards multipolarity and commitment towards multipolarity, so I would anticipate that over the long run, US will be looking to strengthen its cooperation with different countries, including Russia, India, China, and others. So even though in the short run, I anticipate pressures might increase, but long term, I think given the sheer scale of these economies, it's likely that cooperation will improve.
OK, speaking of the long term, the two leaders, when they met in New Delhi, pledged to increase bilateral trade to what, $100 billion by 2030. I mean, that's a significant amount, isn't it? India already imports far more from Russia than it exports to Russia. Can that figure, that trade figure, be reached by 2030, given current circumstances and the pressures that India is under not to buy Russian oil and President Trump's tariffs on India?
Well, I guess, there are nuances to this. Again, oil is a commodity that is quite fungible. What is Russian oil can easily become Kazakh oil, for example. And Russia is a key player in the international oil market, in the international energy market. So I'm absolutely sure there will be exemptions and there will be arrangements to make sure that oil prices remain stable in the global market, and that's in the interest of the US as well. So that's the first issue. The second is that India-Russia trade is primarily denominated in rupee. So that creates its own problem, especially for Russia, in a sense, as it accumulates more and more rupee reserves, which it needs to invest. Now, sort of a much more broader tie, spanning manufacturing, spanning biotech, spanning other sectors beyond oil and natural gas, obviously creates the opportunity for the Russian investors to invest in rupee in India. Where,
Professor, does China come into this? Does Russia's focus on India perhaps signify that it's looking to move away from economic reliance upon China?
Well, I guess you have to look at this from the point of view of, I think, three big countries in the Eurasian space. So that's India, China, and Russia are looking to cooperate. The economic pendulum has shifted more towards the east, and there's no doubt about that. So there's enormous potential for cooperation between these countries. India, Russia, and China, they cooperate within the platform of BRICS, as well as Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as within BRICS, they have what is called the RIC countries, that's Russia, India, China platform. So in a way, it helps India to counterbalance somewhat and reduce the pressure that it faces from its big and powerful neighbor, China. But in case of Russia, I think Russia enjoys fantastic relationship with both India and China. Talking about this trilateral relationship, India, Russia, and China, what does that relationship mean for the wider region? Well, I think, any economic relationship and strengthening of economic relationship is good for the region because it provides stability. It provides economic stability as well as stability in terms of national security. So I would anticipate as economic ties between India and China deepens, obviously sort of the border issues, the vexed border issues would probably subside and be resolved at some point in time. So I would see this positively as a whole, rather than an adversarial relationship between the West and the rest.
Professor, it's been really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us today.
Thank you, Adrian.
As Syria marks a year since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, entire cities remain in ruins. A new World Bank report puts the reconstruction costs at $216 billion. That's nearly 10 times the entire size of Syria's economy. But the government has no rebuilding fund, and experts warn that aid alone can't restore the country. There have been some investment deals announced mainly by Gulf countries, including modernizing oil and gas facilities and privatizing the airports in Damascus and Aleppo. Yet little of that has trickled down to the many Syrians returning to damaged homes, destroyed schools and hospitals, and facing a lack of basic services. Alex Baird reports.
Syria, a nation of 25 million people, is hoping and waiting for an economic turnaround. A year since the fall of longtime ruler Bashar al-Assad, the new government is looking for a new chapter. More than 1 million Syrian refugees have returned home since then, and changes are easy to spot. Road networks are being improved in many parts of Syria, and new highways are in the works. More gas is being pumped into Hom's largest electricity station, and salaries of workers have doubled. Yet millions of young Syrians are struggling to put food on the table. Mohammed al-Bush was excited to return to his village in rural Damascus, but rubble now covers where his home once stood. Finding steady work has been a challenge.
At first, I was happy to return, but now I regret it. I can't find a job. I've thought about working in agriculture, but we have been through many years of drought here. I do not have enough money to start my own business. I would need about $5,000 for that.
Despite hardships, Syria's government has scored big wins in foreign policy, specifically in easing sanctions. After more than a decade of war, President Ahmed al-Sharaa says it's a process that takes time.
The current U.S. administration under President Donald Trump supports lifting sanctions on Syria. As you all have noticed, most countries in the world are now following the same path.
Last month, al-Sharaa became the first Syrian leader to visit the White House since 1946. Before that, he addressed the UN General Assembly in September, and it appears diplomacy is opening economic doors. As the government lays out its agenda, the reality on the ground is clear. Rebuilding Syria's economy will require more than policy shifts. It will require stability, investment, and perhaps, above all, time. Alex Baird, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Let's take a closer look at the numbers. Syria's economy has been wrecked by years of war and sanctions. Its GDP, gross domestic product, has dropped more than 70% since 2011. Millions of people need homes, jobs, and services. Rebuilding will take both time and money. An estimated $75 billion is needed for residential structures and another $82 billion for key infrastructure like power grids and water networks. Salaries are increasing in some sectors, but they're still low. The monthly minimum wage is around $65, and around a quarter of Syrians still live in extreme poverty. There is good news, though. Many sanctions have been lifted and investments are coming in. A World Bank report published in July forecasts the Syrian economy set to grow by 1% in 2025. Joining us now from Damascus is Karam Shah, who's a political economist and director of Karam Shah Advisory Limited. Good to have you with us, sir. As we said, the World Bank thinks that Syria's economy is going to grow by 1%. But, I mean, given how low the Syrian economy has fallen, 1% is not going to matter very much, is it?
Indeed. And I'm not sure I agree with that assessment that the Syrian economy is going to grow by just 1%. I think it could be much higher than that. Let's also remember that the World Bank's assessment was released early in the year, and that's before many other developments have happened, chief among which is the easing of sanctions. I suspect the economy will have grown by the end of this year by maybe up to 10%, actually. And that is quite telling. It's driven by numerous facts. For example, as you mentioned in your report, the return of over 1 million Syrians who were living abroad. the reintegration with other countries economically, the fact that there's now natural gas flowing into the country, that electricity supply has increased by maybe 50 to 100%. There are numerous factors that actually explain why the economy will grow at a faster pace. But exactly as you mentioned, that's still way too little given the starting point.
Karam, what do you make of the new government's monetary policies? Are they going to be enough to stabilise prices and the currency, which, of course, are at the moment eroding people's savings and day-to-day affordability?
I would say the overall direction of travel is promising. Prices have declined significantly in the first 7 months following the downfall of the regime. However, the central bank has stopped publishing data on inflation. And if you look at partial indicators, such as food prices from the World Food Programme, you'd see that prices have started to increase again over the past 2 months. And that is concerning. If you look at the banking sector, I think little progress has been made beyond just grandiose statements. The private sector, private banks, there are 15 of those in Syria. They continue to be unable to reach international markets. They have their own issues next to sanctions. So if sanctions are lifted, they would still be unable to reintegrate into the global economy because of their lack of compliance with international standards. And I would just leave you with the final comment on this topic, which is the central bank has imposed withdrawal limits on private banks that have weakened the overall trust in the banking sector. So many people now are worried that if they put their money in the banking sector, they might not be able to withdraw these funds again, even though there are new rules that allow for fresh Syrian pounds to be withdrawn without limits, but older deposits continue to be restricted.
Karam, estimates for reconstruction in Syria vary from 250 billion to 400 billion and may even be higher. Where is that money going to come from? With donors already stretched by, as you say, the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine and what's happening with Sudan right now, and of course, with climate financing that needs to go on as well to mitigate the effects of climate change. Who's going to pay?
That's the question. And I completely agree with you. The international community is not going to be able to foot the bill. If you look at other contexts, look at Ukraine, for example, which matters much, much more to many larger donor states. When they held a reconstruction conference 3 years ago, they managed to get $50 to $60 billion. Syria, if there is such a conference, I doubt it would get even that much. And yet that would be less than a quarter of the amount that Syria needs. I think ultimately it's going to boil down to the private sector. It's the Syrian private sector and some international investments that will do the job. And if you look at it from that vantage point, then you view the role of the international community to be different from just paying. Their role should be to remove the obstacles for private actors to be able to operate. They need to remove sanctions. They need to help the banks to reintegrate with the rest of the world. They need to enable others to be able to operate. They need to enable international actors such as the IMF and the World Bank to go and build capacity for the Syrian state to be able to regulate that reconstruction.
How much of this is in the hands of the Syrian people themselves? As you were saying, every Syrian I know is a force for nature. They are wonderful people, and they are determined to rebuild their country, it would seem. How long do you think this is going to take before Syria is back on its feet again?
It's going to take a long time, and that's a lengthy process. Not just in Syria, in many other countries emerging from such violent conflicts. I think what matters really isn't just that end point, where we reach where we were in 2011, for example. The journey itself is actually joyful. When you see that many buildings are being reconstructed, that the rubble is being removed, that electricity supply has more or less doubled over the past year, that on its own is actually great and makes many Syrians feel hopeful. Unfortunately, as we speak, still not much has happened when it comes to private sector activity. I think many are still sniffing around, waiting and seeing, testing the waters, and they're waiting for the major obstacle, that is sanctions, to be lifted before they start entering. I think it would take time. Even after sanctions are lifted, sanctions would be a necessary but insufficient condition for recovery. There's a phrase that is known in many other contexts as sanctions hangover, where companies continue to feel under pressure from sanctions that have already been lifted because regulations don't respond quickly, because banks don't respond quickly. So it's going to take a long time. I mean, I would say I wouldn't be surprised if it took up to a decade for us to reach where we were in 2011 in terms of the size of the economy. Its composition is going to change quite a bit. But that journey on its own is a good journey.
Garam, it's been really good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us on Counting the Cost.
Thank you.
The streaming industry is consolidating fast and Hollywood is feeling the pressure. Fewer major studios could mean less competition, fewer movies, and changing opportunities for creators, while subscription prices could rise for viewers like you and me. A bidding battle over the purchase of entertainment giant Warner Brothers Discovery highlights a shift that goes far beyond mergers and buyouts. It could reshape how content is produced and distributed, which projects get funded, and whether cinemas continue to matter. No matter who wins, the result will be a more concentrated industry with fewer players controlling a larger share of the streaming market. And that depends on who ends up owning Warner Brothers, Netflix or Paramount Skydance. Paramount has launched a hostile bid, meaning it took the offer directly to the shareholders to buy all of Warner Bros. Discovery at around $108 billion, including debt. Now, that's an attempt to fend off Netflix's $83 billion deal to own a big part of one of Hollywood's biggest film and TV companies. Both deals raise competition concerns, and the final sale will need approval from regulators. For more on this, we're joined by Tom Evans, who's an associate professor in media industries at Ghent University. He joins us from Belgium. Good to have you with us, Tom. Tell us why this merger, this buyout, this takeover actually matters in the wider scheme of things. We know that it would need regulatory approval if it goes through. How much does politics play into all of this too?
Well, actually, a lot. Any merger or acquisition of this size, of this almost global size, needs a regulatory approval, just to make sure there's no possible harm in terms of competition, less choice, higher prices, and so on. So it can be the FCC or European Commission or any other regulatory instance, and they can impose remedies. So they can impose remedies on the behavioral side, which means that the merging companies need to change their conduct here and there, or it can also impose structural remedies, which would mean that the two merging parties need to resell some of the assets. And based on that competitive analysis that these regulatory instances make, they can also reject the deal. So this is not a done deal with Netflix and Warner Bros. Talking to each other or even having agreed to buy one another. It's not sure this deal will go through because there also this political connection, which is in most cases unlikely to have that much impact. But in this climate in the US, it plays a particular context that one of these companies, and in particular Paramount, has or is said to have better political connections than Netflix with the Trump administration.
Why is Warner Brothers and all of the companies which it owns, why is it up for sale anyway? And what would the deal mean for consumers like you and me, regardless of who actually wins out in the end?
Warner Bros. Discovery is a merged company since 2022. So it's already the product of two companies that were looking their way into streaming. And to be honest, it hasn't been that successful over the past 3 years. They're struggling with declining income, not only from their classic TV business, but also the streaming business is not going that much higher. So it's looking for a partner. And it's very attractive as a company because it hosts a massive catalog of high-value media franchises like Batman, like Harry Potter, like Friends, the HBO brand, and so on. So it matters to us as consumers because we're familiar with these brands, and we're expecting these franchises to appear in movies, and that we have access to it at a reasonable price.
Tom, for people like you and I who love movies and these TV shows that these companies produce, if the merger goes ahead, are we going to notice anything different? What will it mean to people who are working in the industry and creators?
Well, we're not sure that Netflix wants to play the old Hollywood game. So they're now buying a Hollywood studio, but we're not sure that they want to offload these movies to the movie theaters, or instead keeping it for themselves. So this would mean a lot, actually, in a negative way, to the theater industry and for the moviegoers as well. So if you want to watch Batman or Harry Potter in the future, it could well be that we have to go to Netflix instead of going to the theater. That's the major or one of the main consequences of this deal, and of course it would harm creators and people working in the industry.
What does this mean for streaming? The industry is consolidating. What's behind that? Is it to do with economics, with competition, or mere survival?
It's a logical step in an industry that has experienced a lot of growth, but has now entered into a maturity stage, and we've seen that in all kinds of industries. So companies are coming together, looking for more scale, more cost efficiencies. And yes, in the case, not really in the case of Netflix, but more in the case of Paramount, it's a matter of survival. It's being able to be competitive in the future. And they really need Warner Bros. Discovery much more than Netflix, I think.
Tom, really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
You're welcome.
And that's a wrap as far as our show is concerned this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, I'm at A.Finnegan on X. Please remember to use the hashtag AJCTC. You could also drop us a line. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you will find individual reports, links, even entire editions for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.